I never believed there was anything after death. That was a conviction I held on to for most of my life. As a doctor, I had witnessed death more times than I could count. I'd seen patients slip away, their last breaths drawn in quiet, sterile hospital rooms. I'd been the one to pronounce them dead. But I never once entertained the idea that there might be something more beyond that final breath. For me, death was simply the end. There was nothing after. I was a man of science. A doctor who trusted only what could be proven, what could be observed. I didn't have the luxury of entertaining thoughts of an afterlife, or ghosts, or anything supernatural. The human body was a marvel, but once it shut down, once the heart stopped beating and the brain ceased firing, that was it. We were gone. And there was nothing wrong with that. In fact, I believed it was a comforting thought. Death was the end of suffering, the end of questions. But everything changed in an instant. It started like any other day. I was preparing for a routine heart surgery, a standard bypass procedure for a patient in their 70s. I had done this hundreds of times before, and I felt confident, as usual. But then something went wrong, terribly wrong. A sharp pain in my chest, followed by a crushing weight, and the world seemed to tilt. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the operating table, my own body cold and unmoving. The team of doctors and nurses around me were frantic, but I could hear them talking over me. I couldn't feel my limbs, I couldn't feel my chest rise and fall. My mind was alert, but my body was completely still. I could hear someone shout, "He's gone. He's gone." I wasn't sure what had happened, but I could tell, I knew deep down, that I had died. My heart had stopped. I was no longer part of the living. The sensation was strange. At first, there was nothing. No pain. No fear. Just an eerie silence that stretched out for what felt like forever. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, I began to feel something shift. A faint tingling sensation at the top of my head, as if I were floating. I looked down. There I was, lying on the operating table. I could see my own body, pale and lifeless, surrounded by frantic doctors and nurses. I wasn't scared. Not at first. It was as though I were watching a scene unfold from a distance, as if I were a spectator to my own death. There was no panic, no urgent desire to return to my body. There was only an overwhelming sense of detachment, of being completely separated from everything that had once been me. Then, something began to change. The sensation of floating grew stronger. It wasn't just my head anymore, it was my entire body. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I felt myself rising, lifting from the cold, sterile table. The world around me seemed to fade into the background, like I was slipping into another dimension. I floated upward. I felt no weight, no gravity pulling me down. I was weightless, suspended in space. And then, above me, I saw it. At first, it was just a glimmer, like a distant star shining through the darkness. But it grew brighter, and I could sense its warmth, its pull. It was an intense, radiant light, unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't blinding, but it was powerful. There was something deeply comforting about it, something that made me feel at ease in a way I had never experienced before. I wanted to reach for it. There was no fear in my heart, no hesitation. I was being drawn toward it, and I didn't resist. As I moved closer to the light, I could feel a sense of peace wash over me. A feeling of utter tranquility. It was as if all the struggles, the fears, and the questions I had carried with me throughout my life were being wiped away. And then, as if from nowhere, a voice spoke. It wasn't a loud voice, nor was it a whisper. It was simply, there, as if it was both inside my mind and surrounding me all at once. "You have a choice," the voice said, calm and soothing. "You can stay here, or you can go back." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I was frozen. I didn't know how to respond. What did it mean? Stay here. Go back. I was already dead, wasn't I? I didn't need to go back. I didn't want to go back. I was free. But then, as quickly as the thought came, another feeling washed over me. A sudden, sharp awareness of the life I had left behind. My family. My wife, Karen. My children. My patients. The hospital. The life I had built with my own hands. The responsibilities that were mine to carry. The choice was simple, yet impossible. Stay here in this peaceful, ethereal place, or go back and face the harsh reality of the world I had left behind. And then, I realized, I was already being pulled back. Not by my own will, but by some unseen force that seemed to understand my inner conflict. I had no time to decide. No time to argue. The light that had once been warm and inviting now seemed to dim, pulling away from me. My body, which I had left behind on that operating table, was suddenly pulling me back. I felt myself being drawn down, back into the cold, lifeless form that I had abandoned moments ago. The transition was jarring. It felt like being yanked back from a dream, torn away from the peace I had briefly known. The discomfort was immediate, a sharp, physical pain that cut through the calm I had felt before. I wanted to resist, but it was no use. I was being forced back. I opened my eyes. My chest hurt. My arms and legs felt heavy, and my head spun with confusion. I was gasping for air, disoriented. The world around me was blurry at first, and all I could hear was the frantic beeping of the monitors, the frantic voices of the medical team, and the harsh reality of life rushing back in. I had returned. But what was I now? What had happened to me? No one could explain it. No one could understand what I had just experienced. The room was filled with people, all staring at me, all trying to make sense of what had just occurred. But I wasn't the same man I had been before. Something inside of me had changed, something fundamental. I had seen something on the other side of death, and now, I couldn't unsee it. I wasn't the same anymore. But how could I explain that to anyone? How could I tell them that I had been on the brink of something beyond this world, only to be dragged back against my will? The truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know what any of it meant. All I knew was this: I was alive again. But I wasn't the same person I had been before. And somehow, deep down, I knew I would never be the same. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The first thing I felt as I detached from my body was a strange sense of liberation, like stepping out of a heavy coat and leaving it behind in the cold. My body was a lifeless thing now, something I could no longer identify with. It was no longer mine. The pain in my chest, the coldness, the physicality of it, it all seemed distant, as though I were watching it happen to someone else. I was free. For the first time in years, I felt free. It was a bizarre, almost comforting feeling to float above my own body, observing the chaos around me. I could see the medical team working furiously, their hands moving in a blur as they tried to resuscitate me. I heard the frantic beeping of the heart monitor, followed by the harsh tone of a flatline. I heard the doctor's voice, calm but tinged with worry, saying, "He's gone. There's nothing more we can do." I remember thinking that it was odd that I wasn't afraid. I had expected panic, or fear, or regret, something. But instead, there was a strange sense of calm, as if everything was happening exactly as it was meant to. There was no urgency to return to the world I had just left. I was detached, in a way that felt almost natural. It was as if I were witnessing something beyond the physical realm, something that was deeper than the day-to-day life I had always known. My consciousness seemed to float upward, and I wasn't in control of it, at least not in the way I was used to. I wasn't guiding myself, I was simply being carried. There was no force pushing me, no hands gripping me. It was more like being swept away by an invisible tide, one that had no intention of letting go. I saw the ceiling of the operating room, and I saw the walls as I ascended. And the strange thing was, the more I rose, the less I could hear. The beeping of the monitors became muffled, then faded away entirely. The voices of the doctors, which had once been loud and frantic, became distant murmurs. As I rose higher, the space around me seemed to stretch and blur, and then I entered a place of complete quiet. It wasn't darkness, exactly, but it wasn't light either. It was like a thick, almost tangible space of silence, where no sound could penetrate. For a moment, I felt disoriented. It was as though I had left the realm of the living entirely and was somewhere in between. Neither here nor there. I had no physical form, no sense of time, no connection to anything familiar. But then I saw it. It wasn't immediate, but slowly, as if emerging from the nothingness, a small point of light began to appear. At first, it was faint, like a single star on a pitch-black night. But as I floated closer, it grew brighter, warmer. The light seemed to pulse, not in a way that was harsh or blinding, but in a gentle, inviting rhythm, as though it were alive, breathing with me. The warmth that emanated from the light was unlike anything I had ever felt in the physical world. It was soothing, calming. It didn't burn, it embraced. And the closer I came to it, the more I felt myself surrendering to it. The weightlessness of my existence became something comforting, something I longed for, rather than feared. There was no pain, no rush, no worry. It was just me and the light. Then, as I was drawn nearer to it, something changed. The light, which had been a warm, welcoming glow, now began to grow brighter. It intensified, but not in a way that was blinding. Instead, it was a kind of soft glow that filled every part of me, every part of the space I was in. The sensation was unlike any physical experience. It wasn't just something I could feel or see, it was as if the light was speaking to me without words. And that's when I heard it. The voice. It wasn't like a normal voice. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it was there, inside me. It was not male or female, not young or old, but it was deep, profound, as if it was the voice of something ancient. "Do you wish to stay?" the voice asked, not in words, but in a way that resonated directly within me, as though the question was coming from the very core of my being. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I felt everything. It was as if time had slowed down, but also sped up, all at once. My entire life flashed before my eyes. My family, my friends, the patients I'd treated, the surgeries I'd performed, the relationships I had built. My thoughts were chaotic, but they also felt incredibly clear. It was as though everything had suddenly become deeply meaningful, but in a way that didn't burden me. It simply was. And then, I realized, I didn't have to answer the voice with words. The choice was more than verbal, it was felt, a deep, instinctual knowing. "Do you wish to stay, or return?" The voice asked again, this time with a subtle tone of compassion. The question echoed through me like a gentle wave on a quiet beach. "Stay here, in this place of light and peace, where everything is still and full of love. Or go back to the world I had left behind, the life, the struggles, the people who depended on me." I hadn't expected this. I thought that once I had crossed the line from life to death, there would be no returning. But now, in the face of this profound peace, I realized that I was being offered a choice. A real choice. One that was mine alone to make. And though it felt like I should stay, that everything in me longed to remain in this serene, glowing space, something held me back. Something in my heart, my soul, told me that I had unfinished business. That my journey here wasn't over yet. That the people I loved, the people I had sworn to care for, still needed me. In that moment, I made my decision. I'm not ready, I thought, or perhaps it wasn't a thought but a knowing. I need to go back. The light shifted, dimming ever so slightly as if it understood. It wasn't a disappointment, it was acceptance. The warmth didn't falter, the peace didn't vanish. It was simply the acknowledgement that my time had not yet come. I wasn't meant to stay. Not yet. But as I began to drift away from the light, I felt a subtle shift. A new awareness washed over me. The light, in its infinite wisdom, hadn't just been offering me a place of rest. It was showing me something deeper about life and death, something I wasn't fully able to grasp yet. Something beyond the physical. And with that, I began to descend. But what was waiting for me when I returned? Would I be the same man who had left? Would I remember the peace of the light? Would it change me forever? I didn't know yet. But I was about to find out. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I noticed was the pain. It was sharp and immediate, a crushing sensation in my chest that rattled through me like a thunderclap. The pain reminded me that I was no longer free. I had returned to my body, the very body that had nearly betrayed me. The very body I had left behind. The transition back to the physical world was jarring. I had been weightless, untethered to the constraints of human existence, but now I was anchored again. I could feel the cold metal of the operating table beneath me, the harsh beeping of the heart monitor piercing my thoughts, the bright fluorescent lights buzzing above. I gasped for air, my lungs struggling to expand as they filled with oxygen. My chest was heavy, each breath a battle, and I was fully aware of the walls pressing in on me. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the operating room, the buzz of the machines, the voices of the medical team, all of it rushed back in an instant. But it wasn't just the physical pain. It was something deeper. Something inside me had shifted. I could see their faces now, the doctors, the nurses, the concerned expressions of the people who had been so focused on saving me. But I wasn't focused on them. I wasn't focused on the physical world around me at all. All I could think about was the light. The warmth. The peace. The choice. I had returned, yes, but I was not the same. It wasn't that I was filled with fear or sadness, but there was a heaviness to me that I couldn't explain. The world felt distant. Like I had stepped out of it for a moment, only to find that I no longer belonged fully in it. The things that once mattered, the long hours in the hospital, the patients, the surgeries, none of it felt as urgent as it had before. I tried to speak, but my voice was hoarse, the words a mere rasp. Someone, my wife, I assumed, was at my side, clutching my hand. Her touch was warm, grounding, but even that didn't fully draw me back into the world I had known. "I'm here," Karen whispered, her voice trembling. "You're back. You're alive." I could hear her, but I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't sure what to say, what to feel. I had just been on the other side, standing in the presence of something beyond comprehension. I had felt the light. I had been in a place where time and space didn't matter. And now, I was back. But who was I now? No one else around me seemed to understand what I had just experienced. They couldn't. How could they? I had crossed a threshold, a boundary between life and death, and come back with a story that no one would believe. The hospital staff were too busy trying to save me to even consider what I had seen. My family, still in shock from my sudden collapse, didn't know how to process what had just happened. And honestly, neither did I. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to explain what I had witnessed, to share the peace and the light that I had felt. But the words didn't come. I wasn't sure if I even had the right words. All I knew was that something had changed deep within me, something that had nothing to do with medicine or science. Something that wasn't meant to be understood in a hospital room. As I lay there, my body still recovering, I tried to grasp at the fragments of what I had felt, those moments in the light, the choice I had been given. There was a feeling of love, of acceptance, of knowing that everything, even the pain and suffering of life, was somehow part of a greater purpose. But how could I explain that to anyone? How could I make them understand what I had seen, what I had felt? In that moment, I realized something, I didn't need to explain it. I didn't need anyone to believe me. The experience was mine. And whether anyone else understood or not, it had changed me. It had given me a new lens through which to view the world. But there was still one thing I couldn't shake, one question that lingered in my mind: why had I been brought back? What was the message I was meant to carry? What had I missed in my life that had made the light allow me to return? I couldn't answer those questions just yet. But I knew that the time would come. It had to. Weeks passed as I recovered from the surgery and the trauma of the heart attack. I went through the motions, but it was different now. Every moment felt more precious, more fragile. I found myself looking at the world differently, more deeply, more thoughtfully. It was as though I could see past the surface of things, past the mundane tasks and the routine. I was aware, truly aware, of the fleeting nature of time. And then, one day, something happened that solidified everything for me. Something that made the message I had been given during my near-death experience crystal clear. It was a quiet afternoon. Karen and I were sitting in the living room, the sunlight filtering through the curtains in soft beams. She was reading a book, and I was lost in thought, trying to find the right words to share with her about what I had seen. I knew I had to tell her. But I didn't know where to start. Then, as if on cue, the phone rang. It was my daughter, Sophie. "Dad, I've been thinking about something," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I've been thinking about you, about how close we came to losing you. And I don't want to waste any more time. I want to do the things we've always talked about, the things we've put off. I want to be there for you, for us." And in that moment, it hit me like a wave. I didn't need to go searching for meaning or a grand revelation. The message had been there all along, in the connections I had made, in the relationships I had built. It was in the love that surrounded me, in the moments of connection I had with the people who mattered most. The message wasn't something mystical or profound, it was simple. Life is precious. Time is fleeting. The people we love are what matter most. I had returned to tell that story, not with grand words, but through the way I lived, the way I loved. The light had shown me that death isn't an end, it's a part of a larger journey, one that's connected to everyone and everything around us. And as I sat there, surrounded by my family, I realized that the true meaning of life was never about avoiding death. It was about living fully, embracing each moment, and holding on to the connections that mattered. That was the message I had been given. And it was the message I would carry with me for the rest of my life. I woke up that morning with the same sensation I'd had since returning from the other side, a strange weight in my chest, like something invisible but deeply profound was tethered to me. The world felt different. Not in the way one might experience a bad dream or a jarring shock after an accident, but more in the way a familiar landscape seems altered when you see it after a long absence. It wasn't quite the same world I had left. The colors seemed sharper. The sounds crisper. Even the air, thick with the scent of morning coffee and the faint hum of traffic outside, felt heavier, as if each moment carried more significance than it ever had before. I made my way downstairs slowly, trying to get my bearings. The house was quiet, save for the soft rustle of paper as Karen read the newspaper at the kitchen table. I hadn't shared much of what I had experienced since waking up in that sterile hospital room, and I wasn't sure how to. Every time I tried, the words seemed inadequate. How do you explain a realm beyond this one? How do you describe a light that was so warm, so pure, that it seemed to transcend everything? I sat across from Karen, and she looked up from her reading. Her face softened when she saw me. "You look different," she said quietly. "Not just physically. There's something more." I couldn't find the words. How could I explain to her that I wasn't the same person who had gone into surgery weeks ago? How could I tell her that I had crossed into the unknown and come back, forever changed by something I couldn't even fully comprehend? "I've been thinking a lot," I began, my voice more hesitant than I intended. "About what happened. About what I saw." Karen put the newspaper down and leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concern. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But I'm here, John. Whatever you need, I'm here. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the storm of thoughts swirling in my mind. The experience was still fresh, but it was also starting to feel like a distant memory, something I couldn't fully grasp anymore. All I had were fleeting moments, the light, the voice, the choice, and an overwhelming sense that it wasn't time yet to share the deeper truths. I'm not sure I can explain it, I finally said. But something happened. Something that changed me. Karen was silent for a moment, her eyes searching mine as if trying to decipher the unspoken words. I could see the concern in her eyes, the same concern she had felt every time I'd come home late from the hospital, every time I'd been too tired or too distant to connect with her. But now, it was different. There was a new kind of awareness in me, an awareness that I couldn't shake, no matter how much I tried to return to my old life. I'm here, she said softly, her voice breaking through my thoughts. Whatever that change is, we'll go through it together. But as I looked at her, I realized that I wasn't sure if I could. I wasn't sure if she could understand what had happened to me. I wasn't sure if I understood it myself. How could she relate to a world I had glimpsed but could not fully explain? How could anyone? My mind wandered back to the moment when I had been given the choice. I remembered the question from the light, do you wish to stay, or return? I had chosen to return. But now, I wondered, had I made the right choice? Could I even go back to the life I once had, knowing what I knew now? Knowing that there was something beyond the physical world, something far more significant than the body I had just left behind? The weight of that question seemed to hang in the air, and it became harder to ignore as each day passed. I could feel the pull of the other side, like a faint tug at my soul, reminding me of the peace I had left behind. I found myself walking through my days in a fog, a kind of emotional numbness that came from knowing how fleeting everything truly was. The endless meetings, the piles of medical paperwork, the pressure of saving lives, it all felt trivial now. It wasn't that I no longer cared about my work as a doctor, or my family, or my patients. But I had begun to see everything from a new perspective. A larger perspective. I had felt something that made everything else seem so small in comparison. I began to question everything, my motivations, my purpose, my past choices. I found myself spending more and more time in quiet reflection, often sitting alone in the garden, staring at the flowers Karen had carefully tended to. They were beautiful, yes, but even their beauty seemed fleeting. The petals would fall, the seasons would change, and eventually, the garden would fade. Nothing was permanent. Nothing lasted. I began to withdraw from those around me, not out of anger or frustration, but because I could no longer relate to them the way I once had. I was no longer the man who had lived each day as if it would never end. I had seen what lay beyond the veil, and it had shifted everything. I no longer knew how to go about my life with the same certainty I once had. Karen noticed the change, of course. She noticed the distance between us, the way I had stopped sharing my thoughts and feelings, the way I had stopped being fully present. And she was patient, as always. But I could tell she was starting to feel the strain. She would ask me about the experience, but I didn't have the answer she wanted. I didn't even know what I was supposed to say. I could feel the tension building between us. The unspoken frustration in her eyes when I stared off into space instead of engaging with her. The worry in her voice when she asked if I was okay, and I simply nodded, not knowing how to put my emotions into words. It wasn't just her, it was everyone. My colleagues at the hospital noticed my detachment. My friends, too. They began to wonder if I was suffering from some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder, as if my heart attack had somehow triggered a psychological break. But that wasn't it. It wasn't trauma. It was something else. Something deeper. I had returned to my life, yes. But the life I returned to no longer felt like my own. I began to question the purpose of it all. The choice I had made to return. Was it truly my choice? Or was I meant to understand something more, something I was still too afraid to confront. And so I found myself at a crossroads. Do I continue living this life, carrying the weight of this experience in silence, knowing that the world around me cannot possibly understand? Or do I take a leap and try to share what I know, even if it means facing rejection, even if it means pushing away the life I have spent so many years building? I didn't know the answer yet. But I knew that I couldn't keep walking this path in silence. I woke up that morning with a heavy sense of confusion, as if the dream I had lived through had somehow bled into the waking world. The hospital room lights were dim, casting shadows on the whitewashed walls. The feeling of disorientation was still thick around me. It was as though my body was awake, but my mind was still trying to make sense of what had happened. Karen was sitting beside me, a cup of coffee in her hand, watching me carefully as I rubbed my temples. Her face was softer than I remembered, though there was a lingering sadness in her eyes. She noticed the change in me, the way I had withdrawn into myself, unable to share the full extent of what had happened. "John," she said gently, her voice as tender as it had ever been. "I know you don't want to talk about it, but you can't keep this inside forever. We need to face this together." Her words, though spoken softly, felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. There was no escaping the fact that my experience, my time spent on the other side, had altered me in ways that I hadn't even begun to comprehend. But I wasn't ready to share it with her, not yet. It felt too overwhelming. Too vast. How could I explain something that, in many ways, felt so impossible to understand myself? I sat up slowly, the sterile hospital sheets crinkling beneath me. The faint beeping of the heart monitor felt like an intrusion into the silence of my thoughts. I looked at Karen, at the way her hands trembled slightly as she reached out to touch mine. She was worried, I could tell. She had every right to be. But I wasn't sure if I could articulate the deep ache I felt inside. "I know you're hurting," she said, squeezing my hand. "But we have to talk about it, John. I know you saw something that changed you. And I want to understand. I need to understand." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words pressing on me. She wanted me to open up, to tell her everything, but the truth was, I wasn't sure if I even understood everything myself. How could I explain the sensation of floating in darkness, the overwhelming presence of light, the sense of love that poured into me like a river, washing away all fear and anxiety? How could I tell her about the voice I had heard, offering me a choice I didn't feel ready to make? "Karen," I started, my voice hoarse. "I don't know how to explain it. I can't even begin to describe what it felt like to be, out of my body. To be somewhere that wasn't here, but wasn't, not here either. It's like I was more than I am now. I felt everything, all at once, but nothing at all. It was peaceful, and terrifying, and beautiful in a way I can't put into words." She didn't interrupt. She just listened. But there was something in her eyes, a mix of worry and hope, that made me want to tell her everything. I wanted to tell her about the light, the feeling of being surrounded by warmth and acceptance, but each time I tried, the words felt too small, too inadequate to describe the depth of what I had experienced. Did you see anything else? Anything, beyond the light?" Karen asked, her voice trembling slightly. She was afraid. I could tell. I swallowed hard, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "I don't know," I admitted. There were moments where I felt like I could see everything, like I could see the threads that connect all things. The pain, the joy, the suffering, the love, it was all so clear. And there was this overwhelming feeling that it all mattered. That everything we do, everything we experience, it all has meaning, even if we don't see it while we're alive. Karen didn't say anything for a long time. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable. But I could feel her trying to process what I had said, trying to piece together the fragments of my words into something that made sense. I didn't blame her for not understanding. I didn't understand it fully myself. But I knew one thing for sure. I had returned from that experience with a message, one that I wasn't yet ready to share, but one that I couldn't shake. I had seen, in the light, that there was more to this life than I had ever realized. The love, the connections, the moments of joy and pain, they were all part of something bigger, something that transcended the boundaries of life and death. Yet the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't ready to embrace that truth fully. The world I had returned to was still full of questions, of uncertainties, of people who wouldn't understand what I had experienced. I didn't know how to navigate this new version of myself in a world that was still so rooted in the physical. The guilt crept in slowly, guilt over having returned when, deep down, I wasn't sure I was supposed to. I had been given the choice, and I had chosen to come back. But I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the wrong choice. The peace I had felt on the other side had been so overwhelming, so complete. I had left all my earthly concerns behind, and for a brief moment, I had felt truly free. But now, I was back. I was living again, and yet, every day felt like a struggle to reconcile the two worlds, one of light, of love, of peace, and the other of the mundane, the ordinary, the fleeting. The lives we led, the people we loved, all of it seemed so fragile now. My guilt grew as I thought about Karen, about Sophie, about my patients. How could I tell them that I wasn't the same man who had left for surgery? How could I tell them that I had seen something they could never see, that I had touched something they couldn't understand? Karen must have sensed my turmoil because she reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't understand it, John," she said softly. "But I love you. And I'll be here, every step of the way, no matter what. You don't have to carry this burden alone." I looked at her, and for the first time since I had returned, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I didn't have to understand everything. Maybe the key was simply to keep living, to keep trying to connect with the people I loved, even if I couldn't explain everything I had seen. The truth was, I wasn't sure what came next. But I knew one thing, I had a choice. I could either let this experience consume me, lock it away and bury it deep inside, or I could share it with those who mattered. It wasn't about having all the answers, it was about living with the knowledge that something greater existed, and that it was okay not to have all the answers yet. And so, I made a promise to myself, one I wasn't sure I could keep, but one I had to make. I would keep living. I would keep learning. And maybe, just maybe, I would find a way to share the truth that had been given to me. Not because I had all the answers, but because the experience had shown me that love was what mattered most. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days that followed were a blur. Life felt like it was moving in slow motion, each moment stretching on endlessly, yet none of it seemed to matter as much as it once had. I tried to return to work, to resume my role as a doctor, but it felt like I was operating in a world that didn't quite fit me anymore. The hospital corridors, filled with the usual hustle and bustle, felt like a distant echo of the life I had once known. I had always prided myself on being a doctor who understood the science behind life and death, a man of facts and reason. But now, after my experience, the sterile nature of the hospital, the reliance on machines and medications to save lives, seemed almost inadequate. The science was important, of course, but it was just a part of something far bigger, something I couldn't quite explain. And then there was Karen, who was becoming more and more worried with each passing day. She would ask me if I was okay, if I was eating enough, if I was sleeping properly. I could see the concern in her eyes, but I couldn't share with her what I had seen, what I had felt. It was as if the words I needed didn't exist in any language. But as the weeks went by, I realized that I couldn't keep living this way. The heaviness I carried was becoming unbearable, and I could no longer keep the experience inside. I needed to speak, to let it out, if not for my sake, then for the sake of those who might understand, those who might benefit from what I had learned. There had to be a way to bridge the gap between the experience and the world I had returned to. It was one evening when I found myself sitting alone in my office at the hospital, staring at the stack of paperwork that needed my attention. The weight of it all pressed on me, but it was nothing compared to the weight of my thoughts. I needed to talk to someone. I needed to share what I had experienced, even if it meant sounding insane or unhinged. The choice had been given to me when I had crossed over, stay or return. And I had chosen to return for a reason. I had to find out what that reason was. I stood up abruptly, feeling a surge of energy that I hadn't felt in weeks. I walked out of my office and down the hall, passing by familiar faces, nurses, staff, fellow doctors, but they didn't even seem to notice me. I didn't belong here anymore, not in the same way. But there was one person who might listen, who might understand. I headed straight for the office of Dr. Janet, a colleague I had known for years. She was one of the few people in the hospital who had always questioned the boundaries of science, someone who wasn't afraid to entertain ideas beyond what was measurable or provable. We had often had long discussions about the nature of consciousness, the mind-body connection, and the mysteries of life and death. But even so, I wasn't sure if she would understand what I had been through. She was in her office, as I had hoped, and when I knocked on the door, she looked up in surprise. Her expression softened when she saw the look in my eyes. "John," she said warmly. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. "I need to talk to you, Janet," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "I need to tell you something. Something that happened to me. And I'm not sure you'll believe it, but I have to tell someone." Her eyes didn't leave mine. She knew I was serious, that this wasn't just some casual conversation. "Of course," she said, gesturing to the chair in front of her desk. "Sit down. Take your time." I sat, feeling the weight of my decision. I had no idea how to start, or even where to begin. But once I started talking, the words began to flow, and for the first time since my return, I allowed myself to fully explain everything: my death, the light, the voice, the choice. I told her everything, even the parts one wasn't sure I understood myself. At first, Janet was silent, listening intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. But as I spoke, I could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She wasn't shocked, as I had expected. She wasn't dismissive, as I feared. She was intrigued. "John," she said when I finished. "What you're describing sounds incredibly similar to what many people report in near-death experiences. The light, the feeling of peace, the sense of knowing something deeper than the physical world. I've read about these phenomena, but I never imagined I'd be sitting here hearing someone I respect describe it so vividly." I sat back, a mixture of relief and surprise washing over me. I hadn't expected her to react like this. I thought she would think I was losing my mind, but instead, she was validating my experience in a way I hadn't anticipated. "I've read about NDEs," she continued. "But I never fully grasped how profound they could be until now. I have to admit, John, I've always been skeptical of things I can't measure or study, but what you're describing. It's real. And I believe you." Her words were a balm to the rawness of my soul. It felt like a weight had been lifted from me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone in what I had experienced. I wasn't crazy. But what does it all mean? I asked, the question I'd been carrying since the moment I had woken up. Why did I come back? Why did I have that choice? And now that I'm here, what do I do with it? How do I live with this knowledge? Janet looked at me thoughtfully for a moment before responding. "I think that's the question we all have, John. We spend our whole lives searching for meaning, for purpose. And maybe, in the end, we realize that it's not about finding the answers, but about understanding that there is something more than this life, something beyond the veil of death. You have the unique gift of knowing that truth. It's up to you to decide what you do with it." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. The idea that life wasn't about finding all the answers, but rather about embracing the mystery, was something I hadn't considered. I had always thought that life was about control, about certainty. But now, I understood that the most profound truths weren't always those we could explain. They were the ones we felt in our hearts. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for listening. For believing me." Janet smiled gently. "Of course. You don't have to carry this burden alone, John. And if you ever need to talk again, I'm here. But I also think it's important that you share your story. Not just with me, but with others. People need to hear it. People need to know that there's more out there, that death isn't the end. It's just another step." Her words hit me with the force of a revelation. She was right. I had been given a second chance, a rare opportunity to share what I had experienced. Maybe it wasn't just for me, it was for others, too. For those who were afraid of death, who feared the unknown. If I could help them understand that there was more to life than just this world, then maybe my return had a purpose after all. "Maybe you're right," I said, feeling a sense of peace begin to settle in my chest. "Maybe it's time I start sharing my story. Time to make it count." The next few days felt like an awakening of sorts, as though I was shedding an old skin and stepping into a new version of myself. The conversations I had with Janet had opened something in me, a door I had been afraid to even acknowledge before. I could no longer keep the weight of my experience locked away. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about those I loved and the people who might need to hear this truth as much as I did. That morning, as I sat across from Karen at the breakfast table, the decision I had made to begin sharing my story hung in the air between us. She hadn't asked much about the details of my experience since I'd come home, perhaps sensing that I wasn't ready to dive into the depths of it. But this morning, there was something different about her, something in her eyes that made me know she was ready to hear the truth. "John," she began, setting down her coffee cup. "You've been distant lately. And I get it, you've been through something life-changing. But I can see you're carrying something that's weighing you down. I'm your wife. You can talk to me. Whatever it is, I'm here for you." I had rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times, but no amount of preparation could have prepared me for the gravity of actually speaking the words out loud. It was time. The universe had been pushing me, nudging me gently but persistently, to share what I knew. To let go of the fear that had kept me silent for so long. I took a deep breath, glancing down at my hands as they rested on the table. My palms were sweaty, my heart racing slightly. I had always prided myself on being in control, of knowing exactly how to handle situations, especially difficult ones. But this was different. This wasn't about diagnoses or treatments. This was something bigger. And there was no instruction manual for it. "Karen," I began, my voice steady but quiet, "I need to tell you something that happened to me while I was in surgery. I've been carrying it with me ever since, and it's been eating me up inside. I don't know how you'll react, but I can't hold it in any longer." She didn't say anything at first. She just watched me, her expression softening as though she sensed the enormity of what I was about to say. Her fingers brushed against mine, grounding me in the moment. It was enough to give me the strength to continue. I died, Karen. For 85 minutes. My heart stopped. I was gone. And while I was gone, I saw something. Something so real, so vivid, that I can't explain it away. Karen's face shifted, her eyes widening in disbelief, but she didn't interrupt. She just let me speak, and that was all I needed. The words spilled out like a dam breaking, and I told her everything, the light, the overwhelming sense of peace, the presence that enveloped me, the choice I had been given. I told her how I had crossed over into another realm, and how I had felt connected to everything and everyone in a way I couldn't describe. I shared the part about being told I could stay or return. As I spoke, Karen didn't react with shock or fear as I had expected. Instead, she simply listened. Her brow furrowed, her mouth set in a tight line, but there was no judgment in her eyes. There was just love. Deep, unwavering love. She had always been the steady presence in my life, and now, in this moment, I realized how much I needed that steadiness. When I finally finished, I sat back, my chest heavy but strangely lighter. I had said it. I had spoken the truth, and the world hadn't come crashing down. Karen took a long breath, exhaling slowly as though she was processing everything I had just told her. "John," she said after a pause, her voice calm but full of emotion, "I don't know if I can fully understand what you've been through. But I believe you. I know you. And I know you wouldn't make something like this up. What you saw, what you felt, it's real for you. And that's enough for me." The words felt like a balm to my soul. For the first time since I had returned, I felt truly seen. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being accepted, despite the confusion and uncertainty that still lingered within me. "But I'm scared, Karen," I confessed, my voice cracking slightly. "I'm scared that I won't be able to make sense of this. I don't know how to go back to the life I had before. Nothing feels the same anymore." Karen reached across the table, gently placing her hand on mine. "I know, John. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you. But you don't have to figure it all out on your own. I'm here. We'll figure it out together, okay?" Her words were simple, but they were the anchor I needed. I didn't have to have all the answers right now. The journey ahead would be uncertain, but I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The next few days were a blur of emotions, both intense and raw. Karen was incredibly supportive, but I could see the change in her. She wasn't the only one who had questions now. Sophie, our daughter, started asking me things she had never asked before. She, too, wanted to know what had happened to me. The ripple effect of my experience had started to spread, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. One afternoon, Sophie sat me down in the living room, her eyes wide with curiosity and concern. She had always been the skeptical one in the family, questioning everything and trusting little. But something had shifted in her, too. She knew that whatever I had gone through had affected me deeply. "Dad," she said, her voice hesitant, "I know you're not the same person you were before. I can see it in your eyes. It's like you're different. What happened to you in that operating room? Please, just tell me." I could feel the weight of her question. She wasn't asking for answers, she was asking for understanding. And I realized then that I didn't need to have everything figured out to help her. Sometimes, just sharing the experience, the uncertainty, the rawness, the vulnerability, was enough. I took a deep breath and shared my experience with her, as I had with Karen. Sophie listened intently, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she didn't say much. She didn't need to. She simply nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line, deep in thought. "Thanks for telling me, Dad," she said quietly. I think I need some time to process it, but I get it. I can see how much this is affecting you. I love you, and I'm here for you, okay?" Her words were gentle but firm, and they struck me in a way I hadn't expected. She didn't need to have all the answers either. She just needed to know that I was still her father, that I still loved her, and that we were still a family, even though everything had changed. Once the first few people in my inner circle knew the truth about what had happened to me, it felt like a weight had been lifted. But the weight that remained was a different kind, one that had nothing to do with keeping secrets anymore. Now, I had to confront the reality that my experience wasn't just mine. It was something that could help, or even change, the lives of others if I allowed it to. But there was also the lingering fear that others might not understand, might not accept what I had experienced. The hardest part, I found, was taking that next step, sharing it with those outside my family. People I didn't know as well, people who weren't as invested in me as a person, but who might still need to hear my story. One evening, Karen and I sat down to discuss what I should do next. She had been encouraging me to share my story with others, even suggesting I look into speaking to support groups, or writing an article about my experience. She believed it could help people who were struggling with the fear of death, or who had lost loved ones and were grappling with the question of what happens after we die. "I think it's time, John," Karen said, as she sipped her tea. "You've been carrying this for too long, and it's not just for you. It's for others. You can help so many people by telling your story." I nodded, knowing she was right. The thought of speaking in front of strangers, of possibly being ridiculed or doubted, still made my stomach churn. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she was right. I had been given a second chance at life, and now, it was my turn to make it count. A few days later, I found myself standing at the front of a small, local support group for people dealing with grief and loss. I hadn't expected it to be so intimate, maybe 20 or so people, all sitting in a circle, eyes weary and filled with questions. Some looked like they had just begun their grieving process, others seemed like they had been stuck in it for years. I wasn't sure how to begin. What did I say to a room full of strangers who were in pain? I took a deep breath, glanced at Karen who was sitting in the back of the room, giving me an encouraging smile, and started. "I'm not sure how to start this," I began, my voice shaking just slightly. "But I'll start by telling you that I've been where you are. I've been in that place of uncertainty, of fear, and grief. And I'm here today because I was given a chance to return after I was dead." The room went silent. I could feel the eyes of every person in the group on me, some curious, some skeptical. It was exactly the reaction I had been afraid of. But I pushed through. This was the reason I had come here, the reason I had shared my story with Karen and Sophie. It wasn't just for me, it was for all of us. We were all connected by the same fear, the same questions. "I know this probably sounds insane," I continued, my hands slightly trembling as I spoke. "But I died. And while I was gone, I saw things that I can't explain, things that science can't explain. I saw a light. I felt peace. I was told I could stay, or I could return. And I chose to return." I paused, letting my words sink in, watching the faces around the room. Some people were leaning forward, others were shaking their heads, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. But a few of them, the ones whose eyes had been clouded with grief when I first entered the room, now looked hopeful. "There's no easy way to say this," I said, feeling my voice steady as I found my rhythm, "but I don't fear death anymore. I don't know everything, and I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers. But I do know that death isn't the end. It's just a step. And I believe that we are all connected, that the love we have for one another doesn't just disappear when we pass. It stays." I took another deep breath, surprised at how easy the words were to speak now. I had always been used to being in control in a medical setting, but this was different. I wasn't treating patients. I wasn't diagnosing anything. I was simply offering my story, my experience. In the hope that it might bring someone else peace. When I finished speaking, the room was still. For a moment, no one moved. And then, slowly, a woman in the back stood up. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking as she wiped away tears, but she smiled at me with a quiet strength. "I lost my husband 2 months ago," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "I don't know if I believe everything you said, but hearing you say that, it makes me feel like he's still out there. That he didn't just disappear. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this." It was like a wave breaking. One person, and then another, began to speak up, sharing their stories, their fears, and their hope. People began to cry, but it wasn't the kind of crying I had expected. It wasn't despair. It was release, a letting go of the fear that had consumed them for so long. One by one, they all came up to thank me. Some told me they had felt the presence of loved ones who had passed, others spoke about dreams they had, where they felt their deceased family members close by. It wasn't the overwhelming validation I had expected, but it was something much more important, an acceptance that maybe, just maybe, there was something more than what we could see and touch. By the time I finished speaking, I felt something inside me shift. I was no longer carrying my experience like a burden. Instead, it had become a gift, one that I could share with others to help them heal. I didn't have all the answers, but I didn't need them. What mattered was the connection, the understanding that we were all part of something much larger than ourselves. As Karen and I left the support group that evening, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. There were still questions, still doubts, but there was also a profound sense of comfort in knowing that I was no longer alone in this journey. I had shared my experience, and in doing so, I had helped others. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. The weeks that followed my first speaking engagement were filled with more moments of self-discovery than I could have imagined. I didn't go back to life as it was before my surgery. That was impossible now. I was a different person. And I wasn't just talking about my physical recovery, I was talking about something much deeper. Something that had shifted inside me during those 85 minutes. When I had died, I thought it was the end. But now I was beginning to believe something entirely different. Perhaps I had been given a second chance to understand, to share, and most importantly, to live with intention. What was I supposed to do with this newfound knowledge? How could I take my experience and transform it into something meaningful? Karen noticed the shift in me almost immediately. I had always been the type of person who kept things inside, who had my priorities in neat, tidy boxes. But now, I was questioning everything. What was the true purpose of life? What did it mean to love and be loved? And why had I been spared from death, only to be left with so many unanswered questions? One night, after we had finished dinner, Karen asked me, "John, what are you thinking about? You've been distant lately." Not in a bad way, just different. I hadn't shared much with her after my first public speaking experience. I hadn't fully processed what it meant, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I had been given this second chance for a reason. I couldn't let it slip away unnoticed. "I think I know why I was brought back," I said, looking her in the eyes. "I wasn't just saved for myself. I believe there's a bigger purpose for me now. I'm not sure what it is yet, but I feel it inside. It's like this, deep knowing. I'm supposed to help others. Maybe that's why I came back." Karen nodded, her expression soft. She had always been supportive, even when I didn't have the answers. "You've been through something extraordinary, John. It makes sense that you would feel like you have a bigger purpose now." I wasn't sure if she understood fully, but her support was comforting. The truth was, I hadn't shared the entire depth of my feelings with anyone, not even Karen. What I was feeling was still too raw to put into words. But in that moment, I felt more certain than ever that my near-death experience had to mean something. The next day, I decided to take another step forward. I contacted the hospice center where I had volunteered years ago, offering to speak to their patients and families about my experience. I didn't know if they would be open to it, but something inside me told me it was the right place to start. Perhaps there, I could find a way to make sense of the connection I felt to the beyond and help others who were walking a similar path. I wasn't sure how to begin. I had so many questions. Was I meant to be a guide? A teacher? Or was I simply a messenger? My experience didn't give me all the answers, but I did know one thing: death was not an end, but a transition. And if I could help others see that, then maybe the fear that consumed them could be eased, even just a little. A few days later, I was sitting in a small, sterile conference room at the hospice center. I had brought a binder filled with notes, but I didn't think I would need them. I felt like my words would come straight from my heart, and that would be enough. The staff welcomed me warmly, and after a few introductions, we sat down to discuss how I might contribute. The conversation was easy, calm and open, until they asked me one simple question. "What exactly do you want to offer to our patients and families?" I hesitated for a moment. The question seemed so straightforward, but there was a deep weight behind it. I knew this wasn't just a matter of talking about my near-death experience. It was about offering something that would make a real difference in their lives. "I want to share hope," I said, my voice steady. "I want to show them that there is more than just this life we know. That love doesn't end with death, and that it's okay to let go. I want them to understand that death, in a way, is a continuation, not a finality. I believe that's what I learned when I was gone. And if I can help even one person feel less afraid, then I'll have done what I'm meant to do." The room was quiet for a moment, and I felt the weight of my words settle in the air. Then one of the nurses spoke up. "I think that's exactly what our patients need to hear. It's rare to find someone who has experienced what you have, someone who can speak so openly about it. I think this could be very healing for many of them." Their response filled me with a sense of peace, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since my surgery. Maybe I wasn't meant to understand everything right away, but if I could help others navigate the same fears I had once carried, well, that would be enough for now. As the days went by, I began working with the hospice center, visiting patients, offering what I could, and sharing my experience. It wasn't easy. Some people were skeptical, others were angry, even resentful. But there were moments, small and fleeting, when I saw something in the eyes of a patient or a family member. A shift. A moment of relief. A glimpse of hope. And those moments were enough. One afternoon, I sat with a woman named Linda, whose husband had passed just a few weeks ago. She was in her late 70s, her eyes heavy with grief, but there was something else behind her sadness. Something that I recognized. It was fear. "Dr. Hartman," she said quietly, "I can't stop wondering if he's truly gone. If I'll ever see him again." I took a deep breath. I had heard this question before, but with Linda, something about her vulnerability made it feel different. I leaned forward, speaking softly but with conviction. "I can't tell you for certain what happens after we die, Linda," I said. "But I can tell you this, I've been there. And I can tell you that love doesn't disappear. It stays. We carry it with us, and in some way, I believe it's always with us. You will always carry the love you have for your husband. And that love will never fade." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she nodded slowly. "I think I can believe that," she whispered. "Thank you." It was moments like that one that made me realize that my experience wasn't just something that had happened to me, it was a bridge. A bridge between life and death. A bridge to healing. And maybe, just maybe, that was the purpose I had been given. Not to have all the answers, but to help others find peace with the questions. The more I spoke about my experience, the more questions I found myself asking. The deeper I ventured into this new phase of my life, the more I realized that there were still mysteries I couldn't explain. The feeling of the light, the overwhelming sense of peace, the choice I had been given to return, it all seemed to defy logic. But in the silence of those moments, I had felt it. I had known that there was something far beyond the physical world, something more profound than we could grasp in our daily lives. As I continued my work at the hospice center, I began to notice a change in myself. At first, I had been focused on helping others, giving them hope, easing their fears. But now, I was starting to shift. My own understanding was deepening. I had shared my story countless times, but each time I spoke it, something new revealed itself to me. I was coming to realize that my journey, though deeply personal, wasn't just about me at all, it was about the collective experience of life, death, and everything in between. It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon when it happened. I was visiting a man named Frank, a former mechanic in his late 60s who had been battling cancer for years. Frank was a quiet man, but there was an undeniable intensity in his eyes. He had always kept his distance, not wanting to share too much with anyone. But something had changed over the past few weeks. He had begun to open up more, and on this day, I sensed he was ready to talk about something deeply personal. When I walked into his room, Frank was staring out the window, watching the raindrops race down the glass. He turned to me slowly as I entered, his face softening with a small smile. There was something almost peaceful about him, something that hadn't been there before. Dar. Hartman, Frank said, his voice a little raspier than usual, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about the light and about the peace. I never really believed in any of that stuff before. But, well, lately, I've been wondering if maybe you're right. Maybe there is more to this whole thing than I ever thought. I sat down beside him, quietly listening. I didn't want to interrupt. Frank wasn't the type to easily open up, so I knew that this moment was important. He continued, his eyes distant. I don't know what it is exactly. I can't explain it. But these last few weeks, I've felt something. I'm not afraid of what's coming anymore. I've spent my whole life running from it, fighting it, but now I think I'm ready. I'm ready to go wherever I'm supposed to go. And I'm not scared anymore. I nodded, feeling a deep connection with him in that moment. Frank wasn't just talking about death. He was talking about something much more profound. He was talking about peace. A peace that comes when you stop resisting the inevitable, when you finally allow yourself to accept the unknown. I think you've figured it out, Frank, I said softly. I think you're ready. Ready for whatever comes next. His eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something in them that I hadn't seen before, a glimmer of serenity. Frank had been a man of few words, but now, he seemed to be at peace with himself and with what was to come. It was as if he had accepted the idea of a larger, more expansive truth. And in that quiet moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. As I left Frank's room that day, I couldn't help but reflect on our conversation. Frank had done what so many people struggled with. He had embraced the unknown, the very thing that had once terrified him. And in doing so, he had found the peace I had felt during my own near-death experience. Maybe that was the lesson I had yet to fully understand. The peace that comes when we stop fearing the inevitable and instead choose to surrender to it. That evening, as I sat in the quiet of my living room, I thought about the people I had met through this journey, the patients at the hospice center, the grieving families, the support group members. I thought about my own experience, the overwhelming peace, the light, the love that I had felt. What had it all meant? I was no longer just a doctor. I wasn't just someone who had survived a near-death experience. I was a witness to the mysteries of life and death, a witness to the profound interconnectedness of all things. And now, I had to live in alignment with that understanding. I had to honor the message that had been given to me during my time on the other side. For the first time since my experience, I felt a deep sense of clarity. It wasn't about having all the answers. It wasn't about trying to understand the mechanics of life after death. It was about living with purpose, living with intention, and living in a way that honored the peace and love I had encountered in that place beyond the physical world. Over the following months, I continued to visit the hospice center and share my story with anyone who would listen. I continued to speak to grief support groups, to anyone who needed to hear that there was more beyond this world, more than we could see or understand. And as I did, I began to realize that my journey had come full circle. I was no longer just trying to help others find peace. I was helping myself to understand and embrace the profound truths that had been revealed to me. And that, in itself, was the most powerful gift I could offer. As I sat in the quiet of the hospice center, the hum of life surrounding me, I couldn't help but think of the journey I had been on. It had been months, perhaps even over a year, since I had returned from that place, what I had come to think of as, the other side. And yet, the clarity I had found there remained just as vivid, just as undeniable, as the day I had first stepped back into this world. The patients, their families, and the people I had spoken with all carried pieces of the same profound truth, that death was not the end, but simply another phase of existence. What I had learned about love, peace, and the interconnectedness of all things had begun to resonate deeply with everyone I encountered. But as much as I had shared my experience with others, there was still one question I hadn't fully answered for myself: why me? Why had I been chosen to return? Was it merely to share my story, or was there a larger purpose at work, something even deeper than I had realized? In the quiet moments after my time with the patients, when the lights dimmed and the building fell silent, I would often sit in reflection. At times, I felt an overwhelming urge to reconnect with that place I had left behind, the peace, the warmth, the love. I knew it wasn't about going back, that I couldn't return in the same way. But I also knew that the experience had changed me. And in ways I hadn't fully understood, I was being called to live in a manner that reflected the very things I had witnessed. One afternoon, as I was leaving the hospice center, a thought occurred to me. It wasn't an epiphany or a sudden realization, but rather something quiet, a knowing deep within. I had learned so much from the patients I had met, from the families I had shared my story with. And what had struck me most was the undeniable truth that we are never truly alone in our journeys. No one's path is solitary. We all walk this life in connection, whether we realize it or not. Karen and Sophie had noticed the change in me. I was more present now, more grounded. I had stopped questioning the purpose of my experience and had instead embraced it. The answers I had once sought had given way to a deeper understanding of the questions themselves. One evening, Karen and I sat down for dinner after a long day. She smiled at me, her eyes filled with warmth, but there was something new in her gaze, an acceptance. "You've changed," she said softly. "Not in a way that's scary or strange, but in a way that's beautiful. You found peace, haven't you?" I looked at her, and for the first time in months, I felt that peace settle into my heart completely. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "I have." Karen reached across the table and took my hand in hers. "What does that mean for you now, John?" I smiled, feeling a deep gratitude for her unwavering support. "It means that I've come full circle. I've shared my story, I've helped people, and I've healed in ways I didn't think were possible. But more than anything, it means that I understand now. Death is not to be feared. It's a part of life. And life, well, life is a precious gift. I think I've finally learned to live it fully, in every moment." The next few months brought continued healing, not just for me, but for the people I worked with. I had learned that healing was a process, one that could take many different forms. Sometimes, it was a quiet conversation. Other times, it was the gentle touch of someone who had accepted the reality of loss. And every now and then, it was a shared silence, a recognition that sometimes, words were not needed to understand what was truly being said. Karen and I decided to take a trip, one we had always talked about but had never found the time for. We traveled to the coast, where the ocean seemed endless, stretching far beyond what I could see. As I stood on the shore, looking out at the horizon, I thought about everything I had learned. The vastness of the sea reminded me of the vastness of life itself, of the uncharted waters we all sail, guided by forces we don't always understand, but that we trust nonetheless. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Karen and I sat on the beach in silence. There was no need for words, the peace I had been searching for had settled in, not just within me, but between us. It was the kind of peace that came from knowing, truly knowing, that life was more than the sum of its parts. It was the love we shared, the connections we made, and the acceptance of the unknown. "I think I'm ready," I whispered to Karen as we watched the last traces of sunlight disappear. "Not just to live, but to die. And I'm not afraid anymore." She turned to me, her face glowing in the fading light. "I know, John. I know. And I'm not afraid, either." In that moment, I felt something shift inside me, something I had been searching for all along. It wasn't an end to the questions I had, nor was it a final answer. But it was a profound peace, a deep knowing that everything was exactly as it should be. Life, death, love. All of it was a part of the same cosmic dance, and we were all just playing our parts. As we stood and walked back to the car, hand in hand, I realized that the journey I had been on was not one that had a beginning or an end. It was an ongoing process, an unfolding, much like the waves that lapped against the shore. There was no rush. There was no need to worry about what came next. What mattered was this moment, this breath, and the love I carried with me. I had returned to life, but more importantly, I had returned to myself. And that, in the end, was the most beautiful and profound gift of all. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?